Hi, I'm Mr. Nance, and I think it's time we looked at some of the key passages from Scarlet Letter, especially the ones that are going to be on your test, if you're taking my class. Alright, well, let's see. Instructions. Words or phrases to support, let's see. For each of the key passages below, tell the context and how this passage is significant to the theme or plot. 5 points each. Alright. Skip that one. How about this one? The young woman was tall, with a figure of perfect elegance on a larger scale. She had dark and abundant hair, so glossy that it threw off the sunshine with a gleam, and a face which, besides being beautiful from regularity of feature and richness of complexion, it's interesting, had the impressiveness belonging to a marked brow and deep black eyes. Impressiveness. She was ladylike, too, after the manner of the feminine gentility of those days. Ladylike, feminine gentility. Characterized by a certain state and dignity, rather than by the delicate, evanescent, and indescribable grace which is now recognized as its indication. Now recognized. Now we recognize it by delicacy, evanescence. Evanescence, let's say. Evanescence means something that changes or fades away, like the band Evanescence. Alright. And indescribable grace. So nowadays we like things that are delicate and fade away quickly. That's what we recognize as femininity. At least that's what he was thinking. But those days, feminine gentility was state and dignity. So she has state and dignity, she has richness of complexion, regularity of feature, impressiveness, all of this describing the young as yet unnamed woman. But given the context, I'm pretty sure this is Hester. Alright, oh, look at that. And never had Hester Prynne appeared more ladylike in the antique interpretation of the term than as she issued from the prison. Oh, here she's coming out of the prison. So this is the very beginning of the book. Context down here. Probably chapter 2. But that doesn't matter as much as saying when Hester comes out of prison to stand on the scaffold. Alright. Back up here. Those who had known her, had expected to behold her dimmed and obscured by a disastrous cloud were astonished and even startled to perceive how her beauty shone out and made a halo of the misfortune and ignominy in which she was enveloped. Made a halo of it. Interesting. So her beauty shone out instead of being clouded. Interesting. Connection to the sun and light, both of which are key motifs throughout the story. Made a halo. Halo is a glow around something. So what glows? The misfortune and ignominy in which she was enveloped. So she seems to glow in spite of the darkness around her. Reminds me of the rose at the beginning that gives a sense of hope in spite of the darkness of the prison door. Interesting. It may be that to a sensitive observer, there was something exquisitely painful in it. So it's painful even though it's beautiful. But the pain of it is not abundantly obvious. You have to be sensitive to notice that. Okay, interesting. Her attire, which indeed she had wrought. Wrought, what does that mean? Made? For the occasion in prison, and had modeled much after her own fancy, seemed to express the attitude of her spirit, the desperate recklessness of her mood, by its wild and picturesque peculiarity. So even her dress underscores all of this beauty that she has. But it's kind of a desperate, wild beauty. It's not a tame kind of beauty. That wildness, does that come from her defiance of society? From her standing up against them all as they condemn her? Interesting. but the point which drew all eyes, and as it were transfigured the wearer, so that both men and women who had been familiarly acquainted with Hester Prynne were now impressed, as if they beheld for the first time, that was the Scarlet Letter. It changes her, as if they're beholding her for the first time. Interesting. So it's almost as if they're looking at her for the first time because the Scarlet Letter changes her. Transformation. So fantastically embroidered and illuminated upon her bosom. It had the effect of a spell. Ooh, magic. Back to the idea of transformation. Taking her out of the ordinary relations with humanity and enclosing her in a sphere by herself. Isolation, which leads to alienation later in the text. Okay, so all of that's what I got out of the first passage. Now let me write down some ideas. For this passage, I wrote, showing Hester's character, the intensity of her beauty in spite of, and even because of her condemnation. Introduces the letter and notes how the letter transforms her. Also hints at the symbolism of the sun, revealing her true nature. Seems like an adequate enough, if not incomplete sentence, response to this particular passage, especially after how I've marked it up. Alright, next passage, number 12. The voice which had called her attention was that of the Reverend and famous John Wilson, the eldest clergyman of Boston, a great scholar, like most of his contemporaries in the profession, and withal a man of kind and genial spirit. He's kind and genial, as well as being a scholar and eldest clergyman, so he's got a long history here, I guess. This last attribute, I guess the spirit, however, had been less carefully developed than his intellectual gifts, and was, in truth, rather a matter of shame than self-congratulation with him. So he considers his own kindness a bad thing, a character flaw. That's interesting. That really pegs him with the rest of the Puritans who don't see kindness as something to be valued. Alright, well this is still the introduction. Hester on the scaffold. And it shows Wilson's character. Kind. Scholarly. And it demonstrates how Puritans don't really value kindness. Okay, number 14. Hester Prynne, said he, leaning over the balcony, and looking down steadfastly into her eyes, thou hearest what this good man says, and seest the accountability under which I labor. Something that he has to do. Accountability he's accountable for. Okay. If thou feelest it to be for thy soul's peace, so if it'll make you feel better, and that thy earthly punishment will thereby be more effectual to salvation. So 2 reasons why she should do it, because it will give her peace and help her to be saved. I charge thee to speak out the name of thy fellow sinner and fellow sufferer. Who's the daddy? Be not silent from any mistaken pity and tenderness for him, for believe me, Hester, though he were to step down from a high place and stand there beside thee on the pedestal of shame, yet were it better so. So don't pity him, because it would be better for him to be shamed. Why? Than to hide a guilty heart through life. Ooh. Foreshadow. And also, who's saying this? Dimmesdale. So Dimmesdale is telling Hester, please say the name of the man, or else you'll have to hide a guilty heart through life. What can thy silence do for him, except to tempt him, yea, compel him? Yikes. As it were, to add hypocrisy to sin. In other words, he's saying, if you don't tell everybody it's me, then you will be forcing me to be a hypocrite. Interesting. He's almost blaming her here. Heaven hath granted thee an open ignominy, so her shame is public. that thereby thou mayst work out an open triumph over evil. It gives her a chance with public shame to conquer her problem within thee and the sorrow without. Take heed how thou deniest to him. Deny, to deny. So, to keep from him, who perchance hath not the courage to grasp it for himself, the bitter but wholesome cup that is now presented to thy lips. Cup is a religious image of suffering. The bitter cup. So she's having to suffer, but she's keeping him from suffering, but at the same time, perhaps destroying him by keeping him from suffering open shame. He doesn't have the courage. Is Dimmesdale? Dimmesdale is almost publicly asking her to reveal him here, even though he's doing it in hidden terms, not saying his own name. And he's almost saying he's a coward. He's too cowardly to do it himself. This is on the scaffold. Number 36 here. The unfortunate physician. Who's a physician? Chillingworth? While uttering these words, lifted his hands with a look of horror, as if he beheld some frightful shape, which he could not recognize, usurping the place of his own image in a glass. Ooh, a glass like a mirror. So that means usurping. Usurp. To forcibly take place of. Like somebody will usurp the throne and take the place of a king. Okay. So a frightful shape takes the place of his own image in a glass. So he looks in the mirror and he sees a monster. Scary. It was one of those moments which sometimes occur only at the interval of years, when a man's moral aspect, in other words, how good or bad he is faithfully revealed to his mind's eye. So for the first time in a while, he sees who he truly is. Not improbably, he had never before viewed himself as he did now. He sees what's happened to him. How he's grown dark from hunting Dimmesdale's soul. Hast thou not tortured him enough? Said Hester, noticing the old man's look. Has he not paid thee all? No, he has but increased the debt. Ooh, answered the physician, and as he proceeded, his manner lost its fiercer characteristics and subsided into gloom. He realizes that he's doomed himself in this process. But at the same time, by becoming a monster to hunt Dimmesdale's soul, he continues to blame his own destruction and his own monstrousness on Dimmesdale. So the debt, not only is it the adultery that bothers him about Dimmesdale, but the fact that Dimmesdale, by becoming the object of his hunt, has turned him into a monster. Ooh, creepy. This makes me feel some pity for Chillingworth. After all, he doesn't want to be a monster. He could have been something better. But he becomes the embodiment of evil, the black man, as the Puritans call it, by this hunt for Dimmesdale's soul. How sad. This is in the middle of the book. After the second scaffold scene, when Hester confronts Chillingworth. And then all that other stuff I guess I'll write down about its significance. Comparative passages. Number 41. We have a passage from chapter 13 and a passage from chapter 18 to compare. The effect of the symbol, or rather the position in respect to society, was indicated by it on the mind of Hester Prynne herself was powerful and peculiar. all the light and graceful foliage of her character. Foliage. That's interesting. So, the floweriness of her character had been withered up. Ooh, continued metaphor. So all those good things about her character withered up by this red-hot brand, the letter, which is, after all, a red color, had long ago fallen away, leaving a bare and harsh outline, which might have been repulsive had she possessed friends or companions to be repelled by it. Even the attractiveness of her person had undergone a similar change. It might be partly owing to the studied austerity. Harshness of her dress, and partly to the lack of demonstration in her manners. It was a sad transformation, too. That her rich and luxuriant hair had been either cut off or was so completely hidden by a cap that not a shining lock of it ever once gushed into the sunshine. Symbolism there, sunshine. So things hidden. What does she hide? She lets out her guilt. Her guilt is on the surface. But her beauty and passion are hidden. Interesting. It was due in part to all these causes, but still more to something else, that there seemed to be no longer anything in Hester's face for love to dwell upon. Ooh, she's unlovable. That's scary. Nothing in Hester's form, though majestic and statue-like, that passion would ever dream of clasping in its embrace. Nothing in Hester's bosom to make it ever again the pillow of affection. Wow, she's unlovable now, undesirable. Some attribute had departed from her, the permanence of which had been essential to keep her a woman. Ooh. So all that beauty we saw at the beginning has been destroyed by the Scarlet Letter. Such is frequently the fate, and such the stern development of the feminine character and person, when the woman has encountered or lived through an experience of peculiar severity. If she be all tenderness, she will die. If she survive, the tenderness will either be crushed out of her, or, and the outward semblance is the same, crushed so deeply into the heart that it can never show itself once more. So, any tenderness will be crushed. So if she's all tenderness, she'll be completely crushed. But anything else, if she survives, all of the tenderness will be crushed out. Unless it is crushed so deeply that it's just really hidden. The latter is perhaps the truest theory. She who was once a woman and ceased to be so might at any moment become a woman again, if only the magic touch to effect the transformation. We shall see whether Hester Prynne were ever afterwards so touched and so transfigured. Ooh, foreshadowing. And so we get to chapter 18. This is when she throws the letter off. The stigma gone, the letter. Hester heaved a long, deep sigh, in which the burden of shame and anguish departed from her spirit. Oh, exquisite relief! She had not known the weight until she felt the freedom. By another impulse, she took off the formal cap that confined her hair, and down it fell upon her shoulders, dark and rich, with at once a shadow and a light in its abundance, and imparting the charm of softness to her features. There played around her mouth and beamed out of her eyes a radiant and tender smile that seemed to gush from the very heart of womanhood. Ha-ha! That's the womanhood that she's buried away and lost. A crimson flush was glowing on her cheek. Number 39, Mother, said little Pearl, the sunshine does not love you. There's the sunshine again. It runs away and hides itself because it is afraid of something on your bosom. Now see, there it is playing a good way off. Stand you here and let me run and catch it. I am but a child. It will not flee from me, for I wear nothing on my bosom yet. So, the idea of being a child, the mark on her bosom. So, innocence versus guilt. How the sunshine shines on innocence. All right, and we have the symbolism there. Oh, I'm out of time. I guess I'll have to do the rest at home.